Actually, show of hands, how many of you all have grandchildren? Okay, so and great-grandchildren, even better. So, and how many of you all have noticed that they get to play on screens? Tablets, video games, phones, okay. So that was something that has been very significant for me, especially in my practice lately, but also because I have an 8-year-old and I've seen the implications of that. So one of the things that I hope to do is to inform you all about what that looks like, the dangers of it, how you can be a part of changing the culture right now, because right now it's very screen driven. So let me give you a little bit of information about me. As Marcia mentioned, I have a practice called the Kid Counselor, and I do play therapy, which is a therapy style that allows kids to work through their struggles and what's going on in their lives through playing. And it's called the Kid Counselor. And so I have a practice in Trinity, and I work with children 2 to 14. And then I also do a parent training piece where I'm bringing parents in either face-to-face or online, and I am coaching them to use play therapy principles with their children so that they can be effective parents. So I have founded a organization called Play Therapy Parenting, where I am partnering with local organizations and churches and things like that to speak to parents to equip them to be effective parents using play therapy principles. So that's the backstory on me. I think that it's important for you all to understand how I got into what I do and why. So I want to share a little bit about my childhood and what happened leading up to becoming a play therapist, because that was not my intention early on at all. I started graduate school fully convinced I was going to work with the geriatric population. My mom was a medical social worker in assisted living facilities and nursing homes, and so I spent summers volunteering there, and I just felt that that was the group that I wanted to spend my career working with. And interestingly, you know, God had different plans for me, so I ended up going into the school system, looking at substitute teaching, and walking into a classroom where you don't know any of the kids, and every kid in the room starts telling you the bad kid, the kid that goes to the principal's office every day, the kid that gets in trouble every day. And it struck me, these are just sad, broken, hurting kids. They're not bad. When you don't have the jaded perspective and the label, you see things for what they are. So I started thinking, gosh, I just feel like I need to help these kids. And a professor at the University of South Florida brought in the play therapy perspective to me, and it was a huge paradigm shift, and I thought, if I start working with kids now, maybe they won't have to need me when they're older. So very big change of direction of where I thought I was going to go. But looking back, I also think that was informed by my childhood as well. Because my parents are still married. Actually, this past Saturday, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. So they are together, but it has not always been easy. My father was, when I was a child, and still is, to a lesser degree, a functional alcoholic. And my mom, because of that, struggled to use me and my brother as surrogate spouses because she didn't have a present spouse. So it was a very difficult process growing up for me because I had to be everything to my mom, but I didn't have a dad. And so it was a struggle. And looking back now, I realize that throughout that journey, my parents did the best they could 100%. But I think that there were missing pieces there that I wish would have been there for me when I was young. So I wish that they would have noticed that I was struggling. I wish they would have said, she should go to a play therapist. She should have someone help her work through this. I wish that they would have been equipped with better parenting skills. I wish they could have been more effective in their parenting. And I wish that they would have understood the long-term ramifications of struggling in childhood and not having someone to walk you through that journey toward healing. So I've had to do a lot of that on the backside. And so that was something that I realized I wish that I would have had growing up. And what's interesting, as I navigated that myself, I realized that it was cyclical. Because it's easy to say my dad was an alcoholic and my mom was codependent, and so those were the issues. But my father, it's touchy, I'm sorry. My dad was abused by his mom. So when you understand that, you see that that's why there was alcoholism. His mother was the oldest of 5 kids, and basically at 11 years old became the mom in the family because her parents were working all the time. So she was resentful of having to be the parent at 11 and losing her childhood. My mom grew up with loving parents, but she was a daddy's girl, and her mom also was the child of an alcoholic. So her coping was be the cleaner, the washer, the cooker, the take care of everything, but emotionally be detached. So if I look back over 4 generations worth of family, I see that it was a cycle. It was not isolated to me and my 2 parents. And so that broadened my entire scope of practice to say, I want to equip parents, grandparents in the cycle so that the cyclical dysfunction does not have to continue, because all it takes is one change and every generation after that is better for it. So that became a big platform for me, and with my blog and with my speaking and with everything that I do with my practice, my hope is that as I can equip people with new information, it changes. I have a term that I use, is called the parenting prison. You are stuck in a limited set of choices until you are made aware of new ones. And so all you have to do is become equipped, and it changes the entire process for your family. So speaking of dysfunctions, one of the huge cyclical dysfunctions that I'm observing right now is kids and screens. And I think that we might look back several decades from now and say that the early 2000s were a terrible time frame for what we were doing to our children. It is extremely scary, the research that is coming out on kids in front of screens. And if we don't know why and know what to do about it, I think that the long-term ramifications of that are really unfortunate. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So unfortunately, I think a big piece of it is that parents are unknowingly allowing this damage and this struggle to happen. I don't think it's purposeful. I have lots and lots of friends. One of my very, very good friends has a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I can't remember any time being out with them at dinner, at a gathering, that both of those kids don't have a phone watching some kind of movie on the screen. And I genuinely believe in her mind, good, they're happy, they're watching their movie, and we can do what we need to do. And it's not that she's trying to be, unaware or harmful in any way, but I think unfortunately she's just not aware of the significance of that. So the handout that I provided to you has a summary of 2 very recent studies. Those have both emerged in the last year. And for time's sake, I'm not going to be able to cover everything that came out of those studies, but I kind of gave you a little bit of a summary, and I'd like to share a little bit of the highlights of those 2 studies with you. Dr. Nicholas Kardaras, he wrote a book called Glow Kids, and he is one of the country's top addiction experts. So he kind of comes at it from a little bit of a different angle, because he has studied addiction and the brain and how the brain is so at the center of addiction. And unfortunately, he has found really alarming connections between what's happening when kids are on a screen and the addiction receptors in the brain. So some highlights from that study. What's interesting is they have very quietly hired some of the world's leading psychologists and neuropsychologists and psychiatrists to work for video game companies. So we are not talking about 25 years ago where you played Pac-Man and the little guy just ate the fruit. We're now talking about psychologists coming into these gaming centers, very purposefully making games reward-based, pleasure-based, addictive to the player. So it is no longer just a 2D guy on a screen. It's immersive, and it's very, very overstimulating for especially kids, but adults too. There are a lot of adults who have been become treated for gaming addiction as well in recent years. But adrenaline is a big piece of addiction. And when you're playing a stimulating game, there's a surge of adrenaline that takes place in the body. Interestingly, dopamine is also triggered, which is part of your pleasure center, which is what is rewarded when you smoke or drink or do drugs or something like that. So games are actually combining adrenaline and dopamine at the same time, making kids' brains hungry for that again and again and again and again. You can see how it would be very easy to have that become very addictive. Interestingly as well, the book Glow Kids talks about it puts kids in the constant fight or flight. You're familiar with that. Your body has an instinct to either flee from danger or fight, just like cavemen in early days, if they would have seen a tiger, they had two choices. They could fight it or they could run away, right? So the fight or flight mechanism is an instinctual component of the human body. The fight or flight is triggered during video gaming. So you don't have the choice to flee if you're in the middle of a game. So it programs you to fight, to win, to get to the next level, to achieve, to conquer, whatever the game requires you to do. But unfortunately, fight or flight changes the cortisol in your brain. And cortisol levels are the stress hormone. So if you remain in a constant state of elevated cortisol playing a game, it's way overtaxing for your nervous system. So there's the second level of the addiction. The frontal cortex is, I know this is a lot of brain chemistry and biology, and I'm sorry, but I need you to understand that this is not just a behavior issue, because behavior's coming. We'll talk about the behavior that comes out of it too. But the brain is actually changing when they're in front of video games. So it's important to understand what's happening there. So the frontal cortex is responsible for decision making, for empathy, for sympathy, for compassion, for impulse control. And your frontal cortex is actually damaged to a degree when you are in front of a video game. And then there are a lot of studies emerging indicating that if you are on screens for, interesting, this is aside, but they had 8 to 18-year-olds self-report how much time they were spending in front of a screen of any kind. So that could be a phone, a tablet, an iPad, a computer, not necessarily video games, just being in front of a screen. The average from 8 to 18-year-olds self-reported 7 hours a day. I have an 8-year-old. 7 hours a day, it's most of his waking moments. When he's not eating, he would be playing a video game. So 8 to 18 are playing 7 hours a day in front of a screen. So what they're finding is the more screen time you have, the more likely you are to be diagnosed with depression, anxiety, ADHD, all of the behavioral issues that are circulating in schools and in treatment centers. The surge of children struggling with these things has been huge. I say to my husband all the time, I started my practice in '06. There was never a kid that came to me saying they felt that they had anxiety. Never. The last 2 years, I have 5-year-olds coming in and their parents are saying they're just scared of everything. They talk about they're scared all the time. Well, when you live in fight or flight, I'm sure that is scary. That's overwhelming. So the comorbidity is the fancy word for you have one which leads to another. So you play a lot of video games, you have a lot of other diagnoses that emerge as well. So that's the very short summary of Glow Kids. The other study that I added to your sheet, it's a whole bunch of Chinese researchers, and I'm sorry I don't pronounce them well, so I know it's Lin and Zhao and then a whole bunch of other ones that I can't say, but they actually just released this study within the last year. And it's a very long name, but basically what that study revealed, they have imaging that they included in the study of brains, children's brains. And gray matter is affected by the amount of time they spend on video games. And what's interesting on the scans is everywhere there were changes, it lit up in red. The brains were half red with these children that had been on screens a lot. And then the control group, which meant they were not on screens excessively, there was no red on the scans. So to kind of briefly share with you what that study revealed, not only were there functional changes in the brain, meaning behavioral outcomes, there were structural changes, and that's where the gray matter, the white matter, all of those things were seen. So the behavior side of it now. So we looked at the brain-based side of it. Now let's look at the behavior side of it. They have shown that children who are on screens a lot have struggled processing emotions. There have been, we actually just watched a 2020 episode recently, and it followed 3 different people who were being treated for screen addictions. One was a 15-year-old girl, one was a 14-year-old boy, and one was an adult father and husband. And they actually were sent off to treatment facilities, had to leave their families for months, and one was addicted to PlayStation games, that was the father and husband. The girl was addicted to social media on her phone, and the boy was addicted to Call of Duty and like war types of games on his computer. And so this is running rampant right now, and unfortunately these treatment centers are popping up, but the rest of the world doesn't know that they're there, and they don't know how many people are having to be admitted to these treatment facilities. So emotional processing, if you can't handle your emotions in a controlled manner, you can't function. You can't have relationships, you can't succeed at work or school, you can't deal with when you have to turn the game off. That's a big thing. You ask a child to turn the screen off, oh my goodness, eruption, meltdown, tantrum. Why? I can't control my emotions anymore. Well, it's all because of what's been going on with the screens. Decision making is affected. Cognitive abilities are affected. A huge study revealed lack of restorative sleep. Kids, from the time my son was 2 years old, I said, buddy, why are you a big, strong boy? I eat a lot and sleep a lot. He knows it. We say it all the time. If you eat a lot and you sleep a lot, you're healthy. When kids can't get restorative sleep, that's an integral part of their growth. So what's happening is the light that's emitted from these devices are actually interrupting the melatonin cycle and the sleep cycle. So they're not getting restorative sleep. They're not getting restful sleep. They're waking up all throughout the night because their brain is so triggered by noises and sounds, and because that's what they do on games all day long. So restorative sleep is a really big factor, and that leads to a hyper-aroused nervous system. If you're not sleeping, if you can't control and regulate your emotions, your nervous system is at a heightened state all the time, which of course leads to many, many, many behavioral struggles. Imagine having to go to school and be asked to sit still for 8 hours a day when your brain is firing all the time with all the neurons exploding. Of course, there's going to be struggles at school. So often they have noticed that kids become impulsive, moody, they struggle with attention, struggle with focus. And that is just the overarching behavioral stuff. The gray matter actually atrophies in the brain. So it shrinks. Fascinating though, when they put these children in treatment facilities and they eliminated all screens, the gray matter returned. So it is correctable. It's not permanent damage, but there has to be, literally it's called a detox. There has to be a detox from the screen for that to happen. I don't know if you've seen the commercials, but there are quite a few commercials where it was a former smoker, and the smoker will say, the first day after you start smoking, your lung capacity increases 10%. After a week of not smoking, your heart returns to a lower heart rate. After a month of smoking, and it actually goes through how your body repairs itself just by stopping smoking. Well, it's exactly the same thing with screens. So if they are taken away and given a break, their body will repair itself, but the struggle is giving them the environment where they can detox from those screens. So moving on to white matter changes. The white matter is actually what helps the brain and the body interact well. So there are studies that have shown kids get into what is called a catatonic state, which is a fancy word for they kind of just sit and stare and they can't interact the way they should. It's almost like they're kind of in an awake coma, I guess is the best way to say it. And that's because their white matter isn't, their brain and their bodies aren't working right. So your brain's supposed to tell your body how to move. Your brain's supposed to tell your body how to interact with the environment. When those are compromised, they can't do it. So really, and those are on the severe end. Every child that's playing video games isn't necessarily going to have this. But that's the danger and the slippery slope of them being allowed to have screens that often. So let me see if there's anything else I need to share. Oh, the only other thought that I wanted to share about the studies is one of the overarching outcomes that all of these researchers are talking about is the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex, lots of the things that are happening in the brain for development continue changing and growing and adjusting through the mid-20s. So just because they get to 12 or 13 or 14, a lot of parents think, oh, they can handle screens now. They can play Call of Duty now, which is that fighting game. You know, they can have more access to their computers. If they're not 25, their brain is still doing what it needs to do to grow. So there has to be a limit on how much access they have so that their brain can grow and change the way that it needs to. The frontal lobe, specifically, it has 4 main functions. And I think this will help understand the big picture because this was a big eye-opener for me. The frontal lobe determines a sense of well-being. Do we want our kids to grow up or our grandkids to grow up and have a sense of well-being and happiness? Absolutely. Frontal lobe influences that. Academic success. If we want them to be successful with school, frontal lobe's a part of that. If we want them to have career success, long-term job stability, frontal lobe, and relational skills. Marriages, children, parenting, all of the things that go into adulthood, all of that is influenced by the frontal lobe. Frontal lobe compounds damage the more it has to struggle through these things. So the more we can reduce it, the better the chances of all of those things are for their adulthood. So that kind of shows the gravity of this. And I do want to mention, because I think it's important, there is, to a degree, a hierarchy of devices. And let me explain what that means. Watching a show on TV is not nearly as damaging as holding a phone and playing a stimulating game. So not all screens are created equal, let's put it that way. So a child can watch a TV show and it's not nearly as much of an issue, not only because the screen itself does not have blue light. Handheld devices have a blue light emitted, and that's more dangerous. A TV screen does not. So TVs, less problematic. Anything that they're holding in their hand, more problematic. Then the next level would be actually playing something with their fingers on the screens at the worst level. And solitaire, for example, I don't know if you all have solitaire on your phones, but flipping the card is far less stimulating than a fighting game where you're shooting and running around and whatever. So it has to be kind of understood in a hierarchy because there's less damage depending on the engagement of the brain. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's what I want you all to understand and take away from this knowledge now that you have it. I think that first and foremost, it's an awareness problem. I think there's just a lack of awareness from the general population of what's going on. And I struggle with this from a play therapy side of it because almost always if I say I'm a play therapist, they say, what is that? So I feel that there's an awareness issue with play therapy as well. And what's happening is there's all this research emerging, and these researchers are doing all of these studies that are revealing these incredible findings, but it's staying within the research community and within the scientific community, and it's not making its way to parents and grandparents who have kids on their screens. So I think the awareness problem is the first line of defense. Now that you all are aware, it equips you to influence the people around you. When you talk to your kids and your grandkids and your friends, you can now say, hey, it's a really big deal when you're in front of a screen all the time, and here's why. So awareness is at the forefront of it, I think. The second piece of it is, it's a parenting problem. And here's why. Parents have become a little bit lazy, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's laziness for the sake of easiness. Because it's easy to just give a child a screen and say, here, play on this for a while because I have to have this conversation, or I have to do laundry, or I have to do whatever. And unfortunately, that laziness for ease sake is manifesting itself in a lack of interaction. They're not interacting with their kids when they're on a tablet. We went to lunch after church yesterday, And the table right next to us was a 15-year-old or so son and his mom. And they spent the entire lunch, both of them, on their phones. She was staring at hers, he was staring at his. I don't think they looked at each other the entire lunch. And I thought, that was an hour that there could have been really meaningful connection, really meaningful interaction, and it wasn't because they had a screen in front of them. And so the interaction is basically lost when the child's in front of a screen. So I think that is definitely an issue. They can't discipline. And well, not only can they not discipline, but they don't often need to discipline. It's laziness for the sake of, if you're in front of a screen, you're not doing something you shouldn't, and then I don't have to deal with discipline. My friend that I mentioned before, she knew that if they went out, the kids were going to get rowdy, and she would have to discipline them, but if she gave them a screen, they'd sit quietly the whole time. So there's no need to discipline when your kid's distracted by a phone. So I think that's another level. And then the loss of connection. That's one of the things that I train parents. It's called child-parent relationship therapy. If you don't have a connection with your child, you cannot create the kind of relationship that you want with that child. So the connection has to be there, and connections are not forged over screens. They're forged over eye-to-eye, face-to-face, conversational interaction. And we know it with our son. If he's watching TV, which we are very purposeful. He does not get screens during the week. He has to earn it on the weekends, and it's very limited, sometimes to his dismay. But he knows that he earns it on the weekend, and he doesn't get it during the week. But on the weekend, if he's watching TV, I'll say, hey, bud, can you get up and blah, blah, blah? Kane, can you please get up? What? I didn't hear you. I mean, they get so zoned in to the screen. Sometimes you kind of have to snap them out of their attention to even realize that they're being spoken to. So that connection has to be purposeful and intentional, and it's a struggle when kids are in front of a screen. So I think overall, the way that we address this, the way that we move forward so that we don't look back 20 years from now and say, oh my gosh, what we allowed happened to our kids because we just didn't even know. I mean, my husband, we were talking last night, and he said, it's almost like when cigarettes started being advertised. And it was like, sure, smoke. I mean, yeah, it's cool. It's John Wayne does it. Everyone should do it, whatever. And he said, I don't think anyone at that time understood the health ramifications of smoking. Now everyone understands that. But at the time, it just became what everyone did. Well, I think right now we're in that parallel. Everyone's on screens and we don't know the damage, but we're going to look back and say, oh my gosh, if we would have known, this never would have happened. So we have to overcome those issues, the awareness and the parenting issues, with effective parenting skills. You can set limits on your child's screen use. You can effectively discipline when you're out in public and they don't have a phone. It sounds like all we do is go out to eat. It's not true, but this is where I see parents with their children needing to have them sit still. So it's always, and that's the thing, I can't take my play therapy hat off sometimes. So it doesn't matter where we are. I'm observing parents and their kids, and I'm making mental notes. So we were at another restaurant a while back, and husband and wife walk in, and they had 3 girls, and I would say they were 4, 7, and 10, let's say. Maybe 3, 6, and 9, I don't know. Every single one of those kids carried in their plastic case protected, like the kid, you can't break it when you drop it, kind of brightly colored iPad covers. All 3 of them carried their own little screen in. They sat down at the table, and all 3 of them popped the little stand up and put it down in front of them, and the mom and dad were ordering, and the kids were all watching their own. One was Peppa Pig, one was something else. And I nudged him and I said, look at those kids over there. And he says, do you want to walk over and give them your business card and say, I can help you? But it's so prominent, and I think that it's just become accepted because it's easy. And they just don't know any differently. So parents are fully capable of saying, our son, he knows not a chance he's going to have a screen. When we go into a restaurant, he brings books. And I can't tell you, everywhere we go, he had a baseball tournament, and we were in a break in between the baseball tournament, and he was sitting in a chair reading a book. And this woman, random stranger, walked up and said, it is so refreshing to see a little boy reading a book. I haven't seen that in so long. And I said, people say that to us every time we go anywhere because he's not in front of a screen. And that's what they're used to. And they're like, wow, kids still read? And I'm like, my kid reads. So that's a big piece of it. Just helping them understand there are other things that can entertain them and keep them entertained and happy for an hour at a restaurant. It doesn't have to be a screen. However, here is the challenge, because if you're equipped, you can handle anything. But you going home and talking to your children and grandchildren and saying, okay, here's the thing, you guys need to rethink what you're doing. Here's the thing. There's going to be a huge backlash from everyone involved, starting with the kids, because when you take a screen away from kids, it is the end of the world as they know it. They can't function and it's crying buckets because, oh gosh, I have to have my screens. But here's the thing. If they are consistent and if they explain why. He has heard me say this so many times, I don't even have to finish the sentence before he finishes it for me. He says, why can't I have Xbox during the week? Because what is my job as your mom? To keep me safe. And are screens good for your brain? No. So if I'm doing my job, do I need to keep you away from screens? Yes. And that's the only conversation that we ever have. He knows it. He doesn't question it because kids understand being protected. They may not understand a lot of other rules, but they understand being kept safe. And if you say, it is my job to keep you safe and it is safe to keep your brain away from screens, and I tell him, it's not anything against you, buddy. It's not your problem. You're 8, your brain can't handle it. That's just all there is to it. Your brain's not meant to have those kinds of experiences. So if they're equipped, they can handle it. So what it boils down to is the child's going to resist it. The parents are going to resist it because you always return back to easy patterns of behavior, right? It's easy to give them a screen. So you're going to try for 3 days and then they're going to go, oh, these tantrums are too bad. I'm just going to let them have the screen again. But if they understand the rationale behind it, it's worth sticking to it and being consistent and following through. And if they feel equipped, if they know that they can do it from we're all going to be in this together and we're going to talk about it as a family together, it will be fine. They will get through it and everyone involved will be better for it. So here's the solution in a short blurb. If you predetermine usage, that's the key to success. He knows he does not get screens during the week, and he earns screen time over the weekend. He knows it, it's predetermined. He says, Mom, can I watch bowling on a Wednesday? And I say, what day is it today? Wednesday? Is it a weekend? Nope. Okay. Conversation's over. It has to be predetermined. So on the fly in the moment, well, sure you can have it now, but you can't have it later. That's setting up for failure. You have to set yourself up for success. So predetermined uses, consistently enforced. You can't change it because it's easy. You stick to it. And it's determined by age. Older kids can have more screen time. Younger kids cannot. If they are under 10 years old, it should be no more than an hour a day. And that's in total. So phone time, TV time, video game time, tablet time, any kind of screen time, an hour total. No more than an hour under 10. Older than 10, they can have more time. Unfortunately, and this is me fighting the silent fight with academia, unfortunately a lot of schools are moving toward homework on screens and classroom work on screens, and so now it's even more screen time that we are combating. So the challenge is greater now because it's not just managed at home, it's now, oh, well, I have to do my math homework on the tablet. That's part of your hour. And I know that's a bummer for kids, but it's part of your hour. It's a screen. So there's the struggle. My hope is that, I have 2 minutes. My hope is that you all feel equipped to intervene on behalf of the children in your lives. Whoever they are, whatever that looks like, even if it's a short conversation, if it's giving them the sheet that I handed you, if it's watching a video on my website and forwarding it to someone, I hope that now that you have the knowledge, you take action in trying to be careful with your children that you love's brains, because it's a damaging, slippery slope that if we don't intervene soon, we're going to look back and really wish that we had known and we had done something about it. So I am very grateful to have been here. Thank you for letting me share this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to talk with me afterwards. I have business cards if you'd like those as well.